This is Author Talk, brought to you by Author House, the leading provider of services to help authors publish, promote, and sell their books. Author Talk is produced by TogiNet Radio, on the web at toginet.com.
Greetings for Author Talk. This is J. Douglas Barker. The book is titled The Spirit of Attack, Fighter Pilot Stories, and the author who has assembled all of these wonderful tales is Bruce Gordon, who joins me today. Welcome, sir, to the program. Your book is just full of interesting material. What gave you the idea to collect the stories of the fighter pilots and to assemble them in book form?
Most fighter pilots have exciting experiences, but not all of them can tell a good story, and few of them ever write the stories down. Many true stories about fighter pilots are actually written by ghostwriters. I'm one of the few who has actually written my own book because I had 20 years of flying with the Air Force and 132 combat missions in Vietnam, and some exciting things happened. I also talked to other fighter pilots, and they told me some excellent stories that they never wrote down. So as a result, I found it very useful to write down my own stories and let people know what really went on, because these are true stories.
You have an interesting background as well, born in the Philippines, and I believe, if I understand your bio correctly, you were in Hawaii when Pearl Harbor took place. Tell a little of that background as well.
Yes, I was only 7 years old, but I was in Pearl Harbor in Hawaii when Pearl Harbor was hit, and my family, we were refugees from Hawaii in 1941 on the first convoy out of Hawaii on December 25th, Christmas Day, 1941.
Did that have any influence on your joining the Air Force or becoming a pilot?
Yes, I became very aware of the military, and I became quite a military historian, too. And I began to see everything that I did in the framework of military history, and that realized that I was actually making military history as I went along.
You have one story that is headed, or the heading is Alaska and the Spirit of Attack. What is that referring to?
In Alaska, we had free airspace, and instead of the controlled airspace that you have in the most of the main United States, up in Alaska there was no air traffic control, and we were able to maneuver completely on our own, and the targets were able to maneuver. So they would frequently maneuver to try to get away from us in ways that they never did down in the southern states. For instance, an airplane may be claimed to be at 35,000 feet, and when you went after him, you suddenly discovered that no, he was down at treetop level.
Wow.
Or vice versa, you could be down at treetop level looking for him and look up and find a contrail far above you, so that you learn to go after him right away. And you also learned in fighter tactics that immediate action is required. If you delay even a few seconds, the enemy will have you. So you had to respond immediately, you have to attack immediately, and that's the spirit of attack. If you delay, you've been had.
Is most of that accounting from the Alaska notations, was that visual contact or was it also radar?
Mostly radar, but we actually learned to use we call it the Mark 1 Mod 0 eyeball. Your old standard eyeball you were coming in with, right. There's no way to jam it. You can get in there and use your eyeballs to see I once trailed a B-52 that was jamming me very hard, and he was leaving a smoke trail, as they do when they're at high power setting, and I followed the smoke trail right down to the end and nailed him, even though he was jamming my radar very hard.
Wow. You have included many photos. Are they all personal photos, or are they from other pilots that you knew?
There are many personal photos. but at the same time, I did use some that I gathered from the internet because I wanted to let the reader know what kind of planes I'm talking about. Certain kinds of planes that if you try to describe them, that's no good. You better have a picture. So I went on the internet and I got some pictures of the types of planes I was talking about. But I also put in some excellent pictures that I took myself, even in combat. I carried my camera with me in the cockpit and took my own pictures, and those have never been printed before.
Did you set out to tell this story to the whole world or just a few family and friends? Who was your target audience?
Well, I started out trying to tell it to my family and friends, and everyone kept saying, "Is that all your stories?" And I said, "Well, no, I have many more stories than that." I ended up with about 40 stories here and about 90 photographs.
Of the stories, which do you feel is going to be the story or the stories that will grab the reader the most?
Well, I'll tell you one from Korea before I went to Vietnam that to me was the most exciting. We were patrolling off the east coast of North Korea, and North Korea has always been a bunch of bad guys, and they are dangerous, and they have killed Americans before, and they probably will in the future. And we had a reconnaissance plane, a low, slow, four-motored plane that had plenty of fuel and had 31 people on board that was out there recording the North Korean radio and radar, and we were there to protect it. And of course it had more fuel than we did, so after an hour or so of patrolling with this guy, we had to go back to an aerial tanker and do some air refueling to get more fuel to stay with him. As we went back to this tanker and hooked up for air refueling, a call came to us. MiG's taken off from Wonsan. That's on the east coast of North Korea. And we continued getting our refueling. And there were 4 of us now out here. And we were getting our fuel. Then we got a call that MiGs are orbiting Wonsan. Okay, we kept refueling. And then the call came, MiGs turning out to sea toward the recon aircraft. And we broke off our refueling, but now we were full of fuel and ready to fight. And we said, how many? 20.
Wow.
So there were 20 MiG fighters and just us 4. And we turned into them and we accelerated to attack speed and attack formation. And we're zipping toward these guys, and our closing rate was about twice the speed of sound. And we were getting awfully close. Now, they had been declared hostile by definition.
Mm-hmm.
And we were not going to turn back. Even though we had 4 of us against 20, we were not going to let them kill our recon plane. He was helpless. So we went right toward them, and when about 2 minutes to firing time, suddenly they broke off and returned to North Korea. So we turned off and resumed patrol. So no one ever knew about this situation. Nothing happened. Nobody got shot down. But I'll tell you, that was one of the hairiest moments, and I was going to go through there and get myself a couple of MiGs and go back home. We had better planes and better fighter pilots. And I feel confident that even 4 on 20 with a spirit of attack, we would have done them in.
That's an exciting story. Glad I wasn't there. You have a total of, did you say 40-some stories, or how many are there in your book?
Yes, about 40. Depends on how you count them. Short stories, or some have several stories built into one bigger story.
116 pages. You've done a wonderful job in assembling it, because the photos are great. They draw you into the storyline. If you were to introduce this story, this book, to someone on the street and let them know that you have completed The Spirit of Attack, the book, how would you do so?
I would say that I am a real fighter pilot, and these are real stories. and that these things are things that a pilot can do. And if you were thinking about joining the Air Force, for instance, I would say this is a wonderful career. People spend a lot of money on motorcycles or something like that. The Air Force gave me a multi-million-dollar aircraft and gave me excellent training and sent me to the trouble spots of the world. I had a very exciting time, and I can't think of a better life. And I tried to put down the things that did happen to me.
What is this saying or the, motto, perhaps, that you use in your personal life related to flying?
Be spring-loaded in the go position.
In the go position. I like that.
They're like a toggle switch that's got a spring on it. You've got to have it spring-loaded in the go position. You're going to go unless there's a darn good reason not to go.
Be prepared.
Be prepared.
And be ready and execute. Wonderful. Is your book different from others out there? I have not seen any like this personally, but I don't know. Maybe you've run across a couple of other accounts that are similar.
No, I don't think there are any out there that are quite like mine. I've seen some very good books written by other people about the lives of certain fighter pilots, sometimes narrating it with them, talking to them. Some people have written some very good books, but you don't see very many that are written by the fighter pilot, particularly that include combat, because I did have 132 missions in Vietnam and even carried my camera in the cockpit as I went into combat.
You also have included, which should get people's attention, a story from World War I vet, Captain Eddie Rickenbacker. How did you meet him, and what was that story about?
Yes, back in 1967, Captain Eddie Rickenbacker of World War I was still alive. He was the founder of our squadron, the 94th Fighter Squadron, the hat and the ring that you see on his planes in the pictures. People these days might not remember who Eddie Rickenbacker was, but he was our hero, and he came to the squadron, and we had breakfast with him, just fighter pilots. He started to get up and talk about space, and I interrupted him. I said, Captain Eddie, that's what we called him. I said, Captain Eddie, we don't want to hear about space. We want to hear about World War I, and we want to hear about a fighter experience that you had in World War I. And he said, all right, he said, you with all your fancy jets and all that and radar, how long would it take you to shoot down and take off, get the warning, take off, shoot down, and return to base from your mission? And I said, well, it would probably take us about 30 minutes, really, to get all the way down on the ground. And he said, 5 minutes.
5 minutes. Open
and
cockpit.
I said, Captain Eddie, how did you do it? And he told us, and I put that in the book there.
Fascinating. And we'll leave that story for our readers to discover when they purchase a copy of The Spirit of Attack. Bruce, this is an exciting book. Who else do you think is going to find it exciting?
I think this would be an excellent book for people to buy for their fathers, grandfathers, or their parents. Even my sisters have enjoyed it. So I think that the senior people who are interested in the Cold War would be particularly interested in what went on.
Listeners, if you have an interest in history at all, this would be a great book to add to your library. The Spirit of Attack, Fighter Pilot Stories, and the author, Bruce Gordon. Thank you, sir, for joining me today. Where do we get copies of your book?
It's available on Amazon.com, on AuthorHouse.com, and on Barnes & Noble.
Do you still have some stories you might be sharing in the future?
Oh, yeah, I always have stories.
We'll look forward to perhaps hearing more in the future from author Bruce Gordon, who's joined me today. Thank you, sir, for sharing your background story and also sharing the insight into this, your exciting read, The Spirit of Attack.
Thank you.
For Author Talk, this is J. Douglas Barker.